The stern-wheeler came against the wharf at the Dalles a little after 9 in the morning on the 14th of October in the year 1884, and Adelaide Renner was the last passenger to come down the plank because she had learned a long time ago that it was better to be looked at once, all at once, than to be looked at the whole way down. She waited until the drummers with their sample cases had gone, and the 2 sheepmen, and the woman with the baby, and the 3 miners who smelled of wet wool and cold rock. Then she took up her carpet-bag in one hand and the rope handle of her wooden trunk in the other, and she came down the plank alone, and the plank flexed under her the way plank always did. And the deckhand at the bottom took 1 step back without meaning anything by it, and she thanked him anyway, because she had also learned that a person who thanks you is harder to laugh at. She was 28 years old that autumn. She stood 5'11" in her boots. She weighed, the last time anybody had put her on a scale which had been a hay scale at a feedlot outside Grovely, Iowa, 310 pounds. She was broad through the shoulders like a man who swings a maul, broad through the back, heavy through the arms and the waist and the hips, and her hands were the hands of somebody who had pulled 140 calves and turned 3,000 acres of hay by fork. Her hair was chestnut and thick and pinned up in a heavy coil under a plain dark blue bonnet. Her eyes were hazel and steady. She had a round, soft face that people called pleasant when they were being kind and other things when they were not, and she had a way of holding her chin level that had cost her some effort to learn and that she never let go of now. The Columbia was running low and green that morning, and the wind came down the gorge the way it always does, hard and cold and smelling of basalt and sage, and it took her shawl and flattened it against her, and she let it. She set the trunk down on the boards and looked up the hill at the town. The Dalles in 1884 was a freight town before it was anything else. It was the place where the river quit being a road, where everything that came up from Portland by water had to come off the water and go on wheels, and so the whole face of the bluff was warehouses and corrals and wagon yards, and the air above it was permanently full of dust the color of ground wheat. She could hear it from the wharf. She could hear the whole town working, the ring of a shoe being set, the squeal of dry hubs, the long profane music of men talking to mules. She had a letter in her coat pocket, and she did not take it out because she had read it so many times that taking it out was only ceremony. It had come to her father's house in August. It was written in a big square hand that pressed hard enough to emboss the back of the page, and it said that the writer was a freighter at the Dalles in Oregon, that he was 35 years of age and sound, that he owned a half interest in a wagon outfit and a house with a stone chimney and 460 acres of grass on the tie, that he could not read fast, but he could read, and that he was not looking for a decoration. He was looking for a wife who was not afraid of work and was not afraid of weather and was not afraid of him. He had written, and she had learned this sentence the way other people learned Scripture. I am a large man, and I have never in my life wanted a small woman. Her father had read that sentence out loud at the kitchen table with a kind of bitter wonder, the way a man reads out a lottery number, and then he had folded the letter and pushed it across the oilcloth to her and said, "Well, Addie." Otto Renner was 61 and had buried a wife and married off 2 daughters and had never once in his life said a cruel thing to the third, which was worse in its way because she had spent 28 years knowing exactly how much he was not saying. The farm was rented. The rent was due. There were 2 brothers ahead of her who would get what there was, which was nothing. She had done the arithmetic of her own life at the kitchen table many times, and it always came out the same, that she was the strongest person on that place and the least likely to ever be given anything of her own. So, she had written back. She had written that she could drive 4 horses and shoe 1 in a pinch, that she could pitch hay all day and had done it, that she could butcher, that she could cook for 20, that she had never been sick a day, and that he ought to know before he spent money on a ticket that she was a very large woman and had been since she was a girl and was not going to stop being one. She had written that plain, in the middle of the page, where he could not miss it. And the answer had come back in September with a steamer ticket folded inside it and 4 words on the sheet, which were, "Good, come, in October. Now she stood on the wharf at the Dalles with the ticket used up and the trunk at her feet and no way at all back to Iowa. And she picked the trunk up again and started up the hill. The yard of Coulter and Grismer Freighting took up the better part of a block on the east end of town, and she smelled it before she saw it, mules and hot grease and the sweet rot of grain sacks. When she came around the corner of the brick warehouse, the whole of it opened in front of her in the flat, bright morning light, and she stopped, because she had not expected the scale of it. 19 freight wagons stood in ranks with their tongues down and their sideboards painted a dark green that had gone chalky. There were 3 long corrals of mules, and a blacksmith shop with the doors open and the fire going orange in the dimness inside, and a loading dock of squared timber that ran 120 feet along the warehouse wall, and men on the dock and under the wagons and up on the sacks, 20 of them at least, in shirt sleeves and slouch hats and greasy vests, and every one of them stopped what he was doing when she came around the corner. She had known it would happen. It always happened. There is a particular quality to that kind of quiet, and she had been hearing it since she was 11 years old, and she had long ago decided that the only thing to do about it was to walk into the middle of it and set your trunk down and wait for somebody to be the first to speak. So she did. She walked the length of the yard with her trunk in her hand and her carpet bag under her arm, past the wagons and the men on the wagons, and she heard one low whistle and one laugh cut off short. And she set the trunk down at the foot of the office steps and turned around and looked at all of them at once with her chin level, and one by one they went back to work. And that was the first small thing she won at the Dalles, though she did not know at the time that she was counting. The office door opened before she could knock on it. The man who came out onto the top step was in his 50s, weary and narrow through the shoulders, with iron gray hair slicked flat and a clipped gray mustache and a brown checked suit that fit him too well for a wagon yard. He had a green silk waistcoat and a gold watch chain heavy enough to hold a gate shut. He came down 2 steps and stopped, which put his eyes level with hers, and he looked at her for a long moment with an expression she recognized instantly and completely, because it was the expression of a man doing arithmetic. "You will be the Renner woman," he said. "I am," she said. "Adelaide Renner. I am looking for Mr. Ezra Coulter." "Thaddeus Grismer," he said, and did not offer his hand. "Superintendent, half-owner." "Mr. Coulter is up the Tige Road and will not be down until this evening, and I will save you and him both a good deal of embarrassment by telling you now that there has been a mistake." She stood very still. Behind her the yard had gone quiet again, and she could feel it, the whole hot attention of it on her back. "What sort of mistake?" she said. "The sort," said Grismer, "that costs a company money." He took a step down and put his hands behind him and rocked once on his heels. "I placed that advertisement myself, madam, through an agency in St. Louis. I placed it on behalf of this firm because my partner is a man who lives 11 months of the year in the mountains and cannot be trusted to see to his own affairs. And I specified in writing the kind of woman this house required, and I can tell you without unkindness that you are not it." He said the words without unkindness in a tone that made a small sound in the yard behind her, a shifting, the sound of 20 men deciding to keep listening. "You specified," she said. "A woman of ordinary proportions," said Grismer. "A woman who could be presented at the Umatilla House at the Freight Men's Dinner in December without comment. A woman who could sit up on the seat of a company wagon at the 4th of July and be looked at with pleasure. This is a business, madam, and a business is what people say about it." He let his eyes go down her once, deliberately, from the bonnet to the boots, and back up. "I do not know what you told that agency about yourself. I know what arrived on the boat." "I told them exactly what I am," she said, "in writing. I told him too. It is in the letter I sent him, and if he kept it, you may read it." "I am sure you did," said Grismer, in the voice of a man agreeing with a child. "Then somebody has been careless, and it will not be this firm that pays for it." He reached inside the brown-checked coat and brought out a folded paper and held it out at arm's length, and she saw what it was before he said it, because she had held one just like it 11 days before in a ticket office in Iowa. "Down boat," he said. 2 o'clock this afternoon. Portland by tomorrow, and the company will stand your passage east from there, which is more than you have any right to ask, and nobody in this town need ever hear another word about it." He extended the paper further, out over the steps, his palm flat and open under it, holding it out to her the way a man holds out a coin to somebody he wants to go away. Nobody in the yard was working now. Not one man. Adelaide Renner looked at the ticket in the flat open palm, and she did not take it. She did not take it, and she did not argue, and she did not cry, which she could tell was the thing he had budgeted for. She looked at the ticket, and then she looked at Grismer, and she said, "Mr. Coulter wrote me. Mr. Coulter paid my passage. Mr. Coulter will be down this evening. I will wait for Mr. Coulter." "You will wait in the street, then," said Grismer, "because you will not wait in my office. I have waited in worse places than a street," she said. She turned around and picked up her trunk and carried it across the yard to the end of the loading dock, where there was a stack of empty grain sacks and a patch of sun. And she set the trunk down on the boards and sat down on it with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, in full view of every man in the yard, and she waited. It is a strange thing to be looked at by 20 men for 6 hours. She counted, later, and found that 11 of them came past her in the first hour on errands they did not have. One of them, a big red-faced teamster named Rufus Kane, with a beard the color of rust, walked past her 3 separate times and said something the 3rd time under his breath to the man beside him. And the man beside him laughed too loud, and Adelaide let it go by her the way you let weather go by. A boy of 19 with a bad haircut and a hostler's leather apron came past at noon carrying a bucket, and stopped and said, "Ma'am, there is water in the barrel by the shop, and it is good water," and went away red to the ears before she could thank him. His name was Emmett Fenn, and he would matter later. And in the 2nd hour of sitting she began, because she could not help it, to look at the yard the way she looked at any place she was put down in, which was to ask what the work was and who was doing it badly. The first thing she saw was the load. It stood by itself at the far end of the yard on 2 freight wagons coupled nose to tail, and it was so far outside the scale of everything around it that her eye had skipped over it at first the way an eye skips over a barn. It was a boiler. A locomotive boiler, riveted, black with age and travel, banded in iron, 13 feet long and 5 feet through, lying in a cradle of squared fir on the bed of the lead wagon with its weight chained down in 4 places. And on the trail wagon behind it sat a single block of cast iron, a mortar block for a quart stamp mill. An ugly square brute of a thing with a lip and a socket, the sort of casting that no living man could move 1 inch with his hands. She looked at that load for a long time. Then she got up off her trunk and walked down there, and nobody stopped her, and she stood beside the wheel and looked at the way the boiler sat in its cradle and the way the chains were run. And she put her hand on the iron and found it warm on the south side and cold on the north. "You want to stand back from that," said a voice. She turned. It was a lean man in his 40s with his left arm in a sling made out of a flour sack and a face that had been through something recently. 2 of his knuckles were scabbed. He was looking not at her but at the boiler, with an expression she had seen on men looking at a horse that had thrown them. "Does it move?" she said. "It moves," he said. "That is the whole trouble with it." He shifted his shoulder in the sling and winced. "Artis. Cleve Artis. I had it 11 miles up the Ketchum 4 weeks ago, and it come back on me on the 2nd switchback, and it killed a good mule and cracked me here. And I am done with it, and I will tell you for nothing that the next man they put on it will be done with it too." "The next man," said Adelaide. "There has been 3, said Artis, and something in him wanted to talk the way a man wants to talk about the thing that beat him. Kane had it first. Rufus Kane, the big one with the red beard, that has been past you 3 times this morning. He took it out in September, and he lost the whole rig off the grade at the top of the second pitch and rolled the trail wagon 140 feet into the rocks, and it is a miracle in this world that nobody died. They spent 9 days getting that block back up onto a road with jacks, and it took 11 men. Then Bert Naylor had it. Naylor is the best brakeman in this yard, and he burned every block of wood on both wagons down to the iron in 4 miles, and he set the wheels afire twice, and he come back down here white as a shirt, and he quit the outfit, and now he drives a delivery cart for a grocer, and Bert Naylor has been freighting since he was 14 years old. Then me. Artis looked at his own arm. Then me, he said again. Adelaide walked the length of the 2 wagons slowly, looking underneath, looking at the reach, looking at the brake beams and the hounds and the way the coupling was made up. She squatted down, which took her a moment and which she did without any embarrassment at all, and looked up under the trail wagon at the axle and the brake rigging and stayed there a while. "What is it going to?" she said. "Ironwood Mine," said Artis. "Half Moon Basin. 84 miles by the Antelope Road, and the last 11 of it is the Ketchum. And the Ketchum is not a road, it is a set of promises somebody made about a road." He spat. "That boiler is 14,000 pounds. That block is 8,000. With the wagons and the rigging you are hauling 11 tons and a little over. There is not a soul in this yard wants it, and there is not a soul in this town wants it, and Crail Brothers would not take it for double, and I know that because they were asked." "And if it does not go," said Adelaide. "Then the mines agent takes the whole ironwood contract away from this outfit and gives it to Crail," said Artis, and he looked at her for the first time with actual attention. "That is $4,700 a season, ma'am. That is the difference between this yard and an empty lot. Halstead give us until the 15th of November, and this is the 14th of October, and there is not a man here will touch it, so you can draw your own picture." She stood up, brushing her hands. "Why does he not just take it apart?" she said. Artis blinked. "Ma'am, the boiler," she said. "It is a riveted shell. It is not going to come apart. But the block is a casting sitting in a socket of timber, and the load is wrong." She pointed with 2 fingers, unhurried, the way you point at a fence that is out of line. "The weight is all up high, and all of it is behind the lead axle. That boiler is set 11 inches too far to the rear in its cradle, and that is why it comes back on a grade. Whoever laid it in there, laid it to please his eye. And you have got 2 wagons coupled with a slack reach so that when the trail wagon starts to run it, hits the lead wagon like a hammer instead of leaning on it. And your brake blocks are fir." She looked at Artis. "Fir on a grade like that with 11 tons behind it is the same as no brake at all. You want a hardwood block faced with iron, and you want a rough lock and a chain, and you want more than that. You want something on the road behind you that is not a brake." Cleve Artis stood there with his arm in a flour sack sling and did not say anything for a while. "Where does a woman learn that?" he said finally. "My father rented a place on a river bottom in Iowa with a hill on it that would not let a loaded wagon down without an argument," said Adelaide. "And my father is a small man with a bad hip, and I am not a small woman, and by the time I was 16, I was the one that took the grain down that hill, and I never lost a load off it in 12 years. She looked back at the boiler. "But I never had 11 tons, she said. "I had 4 at the most. I would not tell you I have had 11 tons, because I have not." Then she went back to her trunk at the end of the loading dock and sat down on it again, and the sun came around the warehouse and left her in shade, and she pulled her shawl up and kept waiting. Grismer came out at 4 o'clock and looked across the yard at her and went back in. At 5:30 the light went long and red on the bluff above the town, and the mule strings started coming in, and the dust in the yard turned gold, and the men began to knock off. And a little before 6 there was a change in the noise of the yard that Adelaide felt before she understood it. The talking dropped a register. Somebody by the corral said a word she did not catch, and 2 men laughed, but it was a different kind of laugh from the ones that had been going around her all day. She looked up. A pack string was coming in the yard gate, 9 mules loaded high with hide-covered packs, and at the head of it, on foot, leading the bell mare by a rope with the ease of a man leading a dog, was the largest human being she had ever seen in her life. He was 6'4" if he was an inch, and he was not tall the way a thin man is tall. He was built like something that had been assembled for a purpose. His shoulders filled the gate. He had a heavy fur-collared buckskin coat hanging open over a dark wool shirt with the sleeves shoved back to the elbow, and the forearms that showed under the rolled wool were as thick through as a fence post. He had long dark hair down to his shoulders and a short dark beard, and under all of that a face that stopped her, because she had spent the whole day braced for a certain kind of face, and this was not it. It was a good face. A straight nose, a clean jaw, weather-tanned to the color of saddle leather, and a pair of pale blue eyes that went over the yard once, taking inventory, calm as a man reading a page. Then those eyes found the woman sitting on a trunk at the end of the loading dock with her hands folded in her lap, and stopped. He handed the lead rope to Emmett Fenn without looking at him and came down the yard, and the men got out of his way without appearing to, and he stopped 6 feet from her trunk and took off nothing, and said nothing for a moment, and Adelaide stood up, because she was not going to be sat down for this. "Miss Renner," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, and it carried. "Mr. Coulter." "I am 5 hours late," he said. "There was a slide on the Tige Road, and I would not leave a string standing in it." He looked at the trunk, and at the carpet-bag, and at the fact that both of them were still packed and sitting outside on the boards at 6 in the evening, and something moved behind the pale blue eyes. "Who put you out here?" he said. "Nobody put me anywhere," said Adelaide. "I was told there had been a mistake, and I was offered a down boat at 2 o'clock, and I did not take it. And I have been sitting here since 10 in the morning because I would rather hear it from the man who wrote to me." Behind them, the office door opened. "There has been a mistake," said Grismer briskly, coming down the steps. "Ezra, a word, in private if you please." "You may say it here," said Ezra Coulter, not turning around. "Very well." Grismer's chin came up. "I placed that advertisement, and I will not be made a fool of by a St. Louis agency that sends whatever comes to hand. I gave a description. This is not it. The firm's money paid the passage, and the firm's money will pay the return, and there is an end of it. I will not have this house made a joke in a town that laughs for a living." Ezra Coulter reached slowly inside the fur-collared coat and brought out a bundle of letters tied with a leather bootlace, and thumbed through them without hurry, and drew one out, and held it up between 2 fingers that were each about the thickness of a hammer handle. "Whose hand is that?" he said. Grismer looked. "That is yours." "Whose hand wrote to Iowa?" said Ezra. "Yours," said Grismer, "but the terms of the notice in the paper were mine, and the notice is what brought her." "The notice," said Ezra. He turned the letter over. "She wrote to me, and she told me exactly what she was and how much of her there was, in her own hand, and I have got it here, and I answered it in mine, and I told her come. You did not write one line to Iowa, Thaddeus. You wrote to an agency that you never told me about." He put the letters away. "There has been no mistake made by anybody in this yard except by you, and it was made in July." "I acted for the firm," said Grismer, and his voice went up half a tone. "And I say to you plainly, before witnesses, that this is not a thing a serious house can carry. Look at her, man." Adelaide Renner stood absolutely still while 19 men looked at her. "I have been looking at her," said Ezra Coulter, "since I come through that gate." There was a silence in the yard that Adelaide could feel in her back teeth. Then Grismer smiled, and it was a bad smile, a thin one, and he did the thing that men like Grismer always do when they have lost the room, which is to reach for a way to make the winning side pay for it later. "Well," he said, "well, then let the firm see what it has bought. He turned half around and threw his arm out toward the far end of the yard, toward the two coupled wagons and the black riveted shell and the square block of cast iron sitting in the last of the daylight. "There is the ironwood load, madam, since you are to be one of us." 11 tons. 14,000 pounds of boiler and 8,000 pounds of mortar block, consigned to Half Moon Basin, 84 miles, the last 11 straight up the Ketchum. Rufus Kane rolled it into the rocks in September. Bert Naylor burned his brakes to the iron and quit the trade. Cleve Artis has got his arm in a sack over there. Halstead gives us until the 15th of November, and after that the ironwood contract goes to Crail Brothers, and this firm is finished, and there is not a driver on this coast will put a hand on it. He turned back and looked at her with his head tilted. "You have got a great deal of woman there," he said. "What is it for?" She heard Ezra Coulter take one breath in, the kind of breath a big man takes before he does something that cannot be undone. And Adelaide Renner put her hand flat on his forearm, which was the first time she had touched him, and she said, quietly, "No." Then she said, "To Grismer, I will take it." Nobody laughed. That was the strange part. She had expected the laugh, and it did not come, because the thing had been said too plainly and in too ordinary a voice, and 20 men who had been enjoying themselves all day suddenly found that they were not enjoying themselves. Grismer recovered fast. "You will take it," he repeated. "I will take it," said Adelaide. "On terms. I want the terms said out loud here where all these men can hear them, and I want them written in the book tonight, because I have been in a house before where a thing was agreed to and then remembered differently." "Name them," said Ezra Coulter. She named them. She said that she would have the 2 wagons, and she would have them stripped and re-rigged to her word, and no man was to argue the rigging with her. She said she would have 20 mules, not 16. She said she would have Gunner Scarr the blacksmith for 2 days, and the forge and the iron. She said she would have any 2 men in the yard who volunteered, and not 1 man who did not. And she said the last thing looking straight at Grismer. "And if that load is standing on its foundation at the Ironwood mine, on or before the 15th of November," she said, "then the ironwood contract is signed in this firm's name, and my name goes on the bill of lading as the freighter of record. Not as anybody's wife, as the freighter." "That is not a thing a woman is," said Grismer. "It is a thing a name is," said Adelaide. Either the name hauled it, or it did not. Ezra Coulter took his hat off, which he had not done for anything else that day, and turned it once in his hands. "Done," he said. They wrote it in the daybook that night, at the desk under the lamp, with Cleve Artis and Emmett Fenn, and the blacksmith standing witness, and Grismer signing last with his mouth pulled flat, and then Adelaide Renner ate the first meal she had eaten since the boat, which Nan Prosser the yard cook brought her without being asked, and sat down in front of her and stood over her while she ate it. Nan Prosser was 60, 4'11", and shaped like a churn, and she watched Adelaide clean the plate with open approval. "There is not one of them out there worth the water to drown him," said Nan Prosser, "except the big one, and he does not know how to say anything, so you will have to do the talking for both of you for about 10 years. Eat the rest of that." Adelaide worked that night, and all the next day, and the next night, and by the end of it she had not slept 11 hours in 3 days, and had never in her life been happier. She had them run the boiler out of its cradle on rollers with 2 screw jacks and a pair of 10-foot skid timbers, and when the timbers had to be shifted, she carried them herself, one at a time, on her shoulder, across 60 feet of yard, and she did it 11 times, and the second time she did it the yard got very quiet, and by the 6th time Rufus Kane had come out of the harness shop to watch, and had stopped smiling. She had the cradle rebuilt 11 inches forward. She had Gunner Scarr make up 8 break blocks of hard maple faced with strap iron, and she stood over the forge while he did it and sent the first 2 back. She had the slack taken out of the coupling reach and a rigid stiff tongue put in so the trail wagon would push against the lead wagon instead of running up and striking it. She had a rough lock chain made with a shoe on it for the near rear wheel. She had a 2-inch manila snub line, 180 feet of it, and a snatch block, and she had a spool bolted crosswise behind the trail wagon bed. And then she had Scar build the last thing, which nobody in the yard understood until they saw it work, which was a drag, a 6-foot beam of green oak with an iron shoe and a chain bridle that could be dropped behind the trail wagon and let bite into the road. "You are going to plow the Ketchum," said Cleve Artis. "I am going to make the mountain hold some of it," said Adelaide. "There is no break in this world that will hold 11 tons all the way down 11 miles. So I am not going to ask it to." 2 men volunteered. Emmett Fenn volunteered at once and turned scarlet doing it, and on the morning they pulled out, an hour before dawn on the 18th of October, a lean man with a flour sack sling came across the yard in the dark and threw his war bag up on the lead wagon one-handed and said, "I can swamp with one arm, and I know every foot of that grade, and I would like to see it get up there." Ezra Coulter brought the 20 mules through the gate himself. He put the big span on the wheel, the 4 that had power enough to hold a wagon back with their own bodies, and he handed her the jerk line without a word, and stood there. "You are not coming," said Adelaide. "If I come," he said, "then when it is standing on that foundation there will be 100 men in this county who will say a mountain man took it up." He looked at her steadily. "I would like to come," he said. "That is why I am not." She looked down at him from the seat, and something in her chest turned over, and she did not have anything at all to say, so she said, "Well, Miss Renner." He said. "Yes, come back," he said. She put the line through her fingers and picked up the whip she did not intend to use, and 20 mules leaned into the collars, and 11 tons of iron came off the yard floor and rolled out through the gate into the dark. The first 63 miles took her 9 days, and they were the easiest 9 days of her life, which is a thing she never afterward tried to explain to anybody who had not driven, because it sounds like a lie. They went out through the wheat country south of town in the cold, with the dust of the mules going up pale in the dark and the eastern sky the color of a knife. And by full light they were up on the tableland with the whole Cascade wall behind them, white and pink and impossible, and the road ahead of them running away brown through the bunch grass for 20 miles at a time. 11 tons does not travel like freight. It travels like a decision. You do not stop it and start it, you set it going, and then you spend the whole day arranging the world so that it does not have to stop. Adelaide learned that in the first 4 hours. She learned to read 100 yards ahead of the led mules for a soft place, a rut, a stone, a dip where the tongue would drop, and the whole load would come up onto the front of the wagon. She learned to take a turn wider than any turn needs to be taken. She got down off that seat 40 times a day, and she walked, because walking was the only way to feel the road, and after the 3rd day she walked more than she rode, and after the 5th day she was not tired at the end of the day the way she had been on the 1st. And by the 8th day her hands had gone from raw to blistered to something else. And Cleve Artis looked at them one night by the fire and said nothing. She fed the mules herself. She was up at 4, and she had the 20 of them watered and grained and looked at every foot before the other 2 were out of their blankets, and she did the harness by lantern light with her fingers, feeling for a cracked hame strap, a hot spot, a swollen place. She greased the axles every second morning, lying flat on her back under the wagon in the frost, which is an undignified thing for anybody, and which she did without one word about it. On the 4th day the near-swing mule came up lame, and she got the foot up on her own thigh and held 400 pounds of unwilling mule against herself with one arm while she picked a wedge of basalt out of the frog with a hoof knife, and Emmett Fenn, who had been trying for 2 days to be helpful and had mostly been in the way, stopped in the middle of the road and stared. "Ma'am," he said, "that is a horse's job to be that strong." "It is a job," said Adelaide. Nobody said whose. They forded the Deschutes at a place where the water ran over gravel in a wide brown sheet, and she put a chain on the trail wagon and took it across at a crawl with the wheels throwing water in fans. And the load came out the other side dry and level, and she stood in the shallows afterward and let her boots fill up, because her feet were hot. They camped the 6th night in a swale out of the wind, with a fire of sage and juniper going, and the sky over the desert came down so full of stars that Emmett Fenn lay on his back with his hat over his heart and would not talk. Cleve Ardis, who had gotten easier every day, said into the dark, "I have got to say a thing." "Say it," said Adelaide. "I laughed at you the first morning," he said, not out loud. "But I did it." "Everybody does," said Adelaide. "I have never in my life seen a load handled like this," said Ardis. "Not once, not by Naylor, not by anybody. You have not scarred a wheel, and you have not touched that whip." He turned over. "I do not say it will get up the Ketchum," he said. "I say I would like to be there." On the 9th day, at 4 in the afternoon, they came around the shoulder of a burnt-over ridge, and a Ketchum was in front of them. It went up. That was the thing that a person could not be told. It went up out of the juniper into the pines, and then out of the pines onto bare gray rock, and it kept going. 11 miles of it, switchback on switchback. And on the 3rd pitch there was a place where the road ran along the outside of the mountain with nothing under it but 400 feet of talus and the tops of trees. Adelaide stopped the outfit at the bottom, in the last of the good light, and got down, and walked up the first 2 miles of it on her own feet, and then came back down, and it was dark when she got back, and she sat by the fire with her boots off for a long time. "We do it in 4 days," she said, "not 2. We doubled the teams on every pitch, which means we take the lead wagon up and leave the trail wagon standing and come back for it, and that is going to feel like losing, and it is not. We cut the drag timbers tomorrow before we start." They cut them in the morning, 2 green firs 11 inches through, and she took 1 end of each herself. She set the rough lock. She went up the first pitch with all 20 mules on the lead wagon alone, and the boiler riding in its new cradle 11 inches forward, and it went, slow as a minute hand, with the chains talking and the mules leaning and Adelaide walking at the head of the near wheeler with her hand on his neck. And at the top of the pitch she stopped them and turned around and looked back down at the trail, wagon sitting alone in the road a half-mile below and 800 feet under her, and she said, out loud, to nobody, "All right." It took 3 days to get to the 4th pitch, and every day of it was the same work done harder, and on the morning of the 4th day, the mountain finally asked her the question it had asked Rufus Kane and Bert Naylor and Cleve Ardis. They had both wagons coupled again because the 4th pitch had a bench in it that would not let a wagon be left standing, and they were 900 feet above the pines on the outside of the mountain with the road tipped the wrong way, and she felt the load change under her before she heard anything. There is a particular slackening. The tongue goes light. 11 tons stops being behind you and starts being above you. The near brake beam had cracked through at the bolt. It did not break clean. It broke the way things break when they are going to keep braking, and the block on that side skipped and screamed and let go, and the whole outfit began to walk backward down a grade with a 400-foot drop under the outside wheels. And the wheel mules felt it come onto their britchin and started to scramble, and Emmett Fenn screamed something with no words in it. Adelaide Renner did 4 things in about 6 seconds, and afterward could not tell anybody the order of them. She threw the jerkline down the near side and roared at the mules in a voice that came up out of the floor of her, a sound Cleve Ardis said later he had heard exactly once before out of a woman, and that had been in a burning building. She went off that seat. She did not climb down. She went off it, 310 pounds coming down onto the running board and then onto the brake lever with everything she had and every ounce she was. And the lever went over hard against her hip, and the good block bit, and the wagon shuddered and slowed and did not stop. And then she did the thing that nobody in the Ketchum country ever stopped telling. She got her left arm through the standard and her boot onto the broken beam itself, on the split iron, and she stood on it. She put her whole body onto the beam where the bolt had gone, and pressed it down into the wheel with her weight, and held it there, and the beam ground, and the maple screamed, and the iron facing went blue and then red under her boot, and 11 tons of boiler and cast iron and oak and chain came down onto the whole mass of her and did not move her 1 inch. She weighed 310 pounds. That was the number that had been said behind her hand in every church, every schoolhouse, every store, every kitchen, in every town she had ever lived in, for 17 years. On the 4th pitch of the Ketchum grade on the 28th of October in the year 1884, it was the only thing in the state of Oregon standing between 11 tons of iron and 400 feet of air. "Drag," she said. Her voice came out flat and enormous. "Artis, drag now." Cleve Artis went off the trail wagon with one arm in a sling and got the chain bridle and swung that 6-foot green oak beam down behind the wheels one-handed, and it caught and dug, and the iron shoe went into the road, and the whole outfit came up against it, and stopped, and stood. They stood there for 4 minutes. Nobody said one word. The wheel mules blew and shifted. Somewhere out past the edge of the road a hawk went by underneath them. Then Adelaide Renner came down off the brake beam and put her hand on the wheel and looked at what she had been standing on, and her boot sole was burned through to her stocking, and the whole outside of her right leg from hip to knee was one solid bruise she would carry until Christmas. And she said, "Well, we will want to shift that block forward before we do the next one." They put a new beam under it that afternoon out of the second drag timber with Scar's spare iron and 11 bolts, and it took them until dark, and Emmett Fenn cried once, briefly, behind the mules, where he thought nobody could see him, and Adelaide let him think that. They came over the top of the Ketchum on the morning of the 30th of October. The Ironwood mine sat in Half Moon Basin under a wall of gray rock with the first snow on it, a headframe and an ore house and a bunkhouse and 40 men, and a bare stone foundation with 11 bolts standing up out of it that had been waiting since July for a boiler. The lookout on the ore house saw the dust first and then saw what was making it, and by the time the outfit came down the Basin Road, the whole camp was standing out in the open in the cold with their tools in their hands, and no one of them was making a sound. Because 40 hard rock miners looking at 11 tons that came up the Ketchum is 40 men doing arithmetic. Orrin Halstead came out of the office with his coat unbuttoned and his watch in his hand, and stopped in the road and put the watch away. 20 mules came down the last 100 yards at a walk. And the boiler came in behind them, black and sound and level in its cradle, and the woman walking at the head of the near wheeler with her hand on his neck was a very large, heavy-set woman in a slate-blue wool dress and a canvas apron with one boot burned through, and she brought the whole of it around in a wide, beautiful arc and set the lead wagon down alongside the stone foundation with the boiler's saddle within 9 inches of its bolts, and stopped and looked at Halstead. "Ironwood Mining Company," she said. "One boiler, 14,000 pounds. One mortar block, 8,000. Consigned the 11th of September. Delivered the 30th of October." Somebody at the back of the crowd said 16 days early in a voice like a man in church. And then 40 miners started to yell at once. It took them a day and a half to get the boiler off the wagon and onto the stone, and Adelaide would not let the mine crew do it their way, which involved 11 men, a great deal of shouting, and a set of chain falls rigged to a timber she did not like the look of. She walked around the foundation twice and then had them build a crib of squared fir alongside the wagon bed at exactly the height of the saddle, and roll the shell across on 4 greased pipe rollers with 2 screw jacks and a pry bar, 1 inch at a time, with a man at each corner watching a chalk line. It went over in 4 hours without a single hand near a place where a hand should not be, and it came down onto its bolts so square that the mine's own machinist got down on his knees and put a square on it and got up and took his hat off to her. "Where did you serve your time, ma'am?" he said. He was a Cornishman, and he had a way of asking things straight. "I did not serve any time," said Adelaide. "I moved things on a farm." "You moved things," he said. "Yes, well, Orrin Halstead was a small, tidy man of about 50 in city clothes that had been in the mountains too long, and he was not sentimental, and he did not become sentimental now." He asked her 9 questions in a row while the boiler was coming across, and every one of them was practical, and he wrote down every answer. He asked what the load had weighed at the axle. He asked how many miles she made on the flat and how many on the grade. He asked what a hardwood block faced with iron cost against fir and how long it lasted. He asked twice about the drag and made her draw the bridle in the dirt with a stick, and then had a man copy the sketch onto paper. Then he asked the 10th question, which was not practical. Cane came off the second switchback in September, he said. Naylor burned to the iron in 4 miles. Artis over there lost a mule and near enough lost himself. Those are 3 of the best Teamsters between here and Boise, madam, and they are 3 men who have done nothing else since they were boys. Why did it go for you? Because it did not go for them first, said Adelaide. Halstead waited. Rufus Cane took it out of that yard the way it was laid in the yard, she said, and it was laid to please a man's eye and not to please a hill. The weight was 11 inches behind where it wanted to be, which does not matter one bit on the flat and matters more than anything else in the world on a grade, because on a grade the load is trying to get behind the axle, and if you have already put it behind the axle you have done half of its work for it. So it came back on him. Then Naylor took it, and Naylor is a brakeman, and a brakeman's whole trade is telling a hill no, and 11 tons will not be told no for 11 miles, it will be told wait, and then wait again, and then wait again, and you have got to have 3 separate things that all say wait, or you will burn one of them out, saying it 11,000 times. Then Artis took it, and by that time it had won twice, and a load that is won twice is a different load. And you, said Halstead. And I had the good luck to be the 4th one, said Adelaide, and to have 3 men's wrecks to read before I laid a hand on it, and none of them had that. She looked over at the boiler standing on its bolts. And I had one other thing they did not have, she said, and I would as soon say it out loud as have this camp say it behind me. When the beam went on the 4th pitch there was nothing holding that load but my own weight on a broken brake. Mr. Halstead, there is not a man in your camp heavy enough to have done that. I have been laughed at for that weight in 9 towns. It is the only reason your boiler is not in the bottom of that canyon. Orrin Halstead looked at her for a moment. Then he took out a pocketbook and unfolded a paper and smoothed it on the top of a nail keg. I am going to do a thing now, he said, that I have not done in 22 years of this trade, which is to write a contract standing up in a mine yard. He wrote, The Ironwood Mining Company will freight with Coulter and Grismer for the season of 1885 and the season of 1886, or concentrate down and everything else up at the schedule already agreed, $4,700 against tonnage. He wrote a while longer, and turned the paper around. And there is a condition in it, madam, and I will read it to you because it concerns you and not the firm. The condition is that the Ketchum freight is handled by the freighter of record on this bill of lading, by name. I do not care who owns that yard. I care who is at the head of the near wheeler. He turned the bill of lading around, too, and put the pen in her hand. She wrote Adelaide Renner in a plain, upright hand, and blotted it, and gave him back the pen, and did not trust herself to say anything, and did not have to, because Cleve Artis chose that exact moment to holler across the yard that the Cornishman was trying to buy the drag beam off him for $4. And did anybody have a ruling on that? They came down the Ketchum empty in 2 days, which is a thing that sounds easy and is not, because an empty wagon on a grade is a wagon with nothing to hold it steady, and it will chatter and skate. She used the rough lock anyway. Emmett Fenn asked her why, on the 2nd pitch, and she said, because if I only use it when I am frightened, I will forget how it goes when I am frightened. And Emmett Fenn thought about that for 11 miles. They were 3 days on the flat, and they came into the Dalles in the middle of the afternoon on the 7th of November with the wagons empty and the mules fat and the whole outfit dusty as a threshing crew. She had thought, coming down the last mile, about what the yard would look like. She had built 2 versions of it in her head, and both of them were wrong. What happened was this: the gateman saw them and did not shout. He put down the barrel he was rolling and walked out into the middle of the yard road and stood there, and then he took his hat off and held it in both hands. And when the lead mules came through the gate, every man in that yard was standing still and bareheaded, 22 of them, in 2 rough lines the length of the loading dock, and not one of them made a sound. And Rufus Kane, who had walked past her trunk 3 times on the 14th of October and said a thing under his breath the 3rd time, was standing at the front of the line on the left with his rust-colored beard on his chest and his hat crushed in his fist and his eyes on the ground. Adelaide stopped the outfit in the middle of the yard and set the brake and got down. Rufus Kane came out of the line. He was a big man, and he had to work at what he was doing, and it took him a moment. "I said a thing about you," he said, "on the morning you come. I said it to Tom Ivers by the harness shop, and I said it loud enough that you heard it, and I have known that for 24 days. He swallowed. "That load put me in the rocks, and I have not been the same man since September, and I have been drinking about it." He looked up. "I am asking you before all of them," he said, "because I said it before all of them." "Mr. Kane," said Adelaide, "you laid that boiler 11 inches too far back in the cradle and it come near killing you, and that is the whole of what went wrong, and if you had been given 3 wrecks to read the way I was, you would have hauled it in 12 days instead of my 13. That is my honest opinion, and you may have it in front of them, too." Rufus Kane made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite the other thing, and put out his hand, and she took it. And that was when she saw Ezra Coulter. He was standing at the end of the loading dock where her trunk had been, and he had been standing there long enough that she understood, all at once, that he had been standing there some part of every afternoon for 24 days. He came down the yard in that unhurried way, and the men moved out of his path, and he stopped in front of her, and he looked at her burned boot, and her cracked hands, and the dust that had gone into every seam of her, and his jaw worked once. "Halstead's rider came in Tuesday," he said. "2 seasons. Signed, I know," said Adelaide. "I was there. He said 16 days early." 15.5, said Adelaide. Ezra Coulter said nothing for a moment. Then he reached out with one enormous hand and took her right hand in it and turned it over and looked at the palm, at the split places and the shine of new skin over the old blisters, and he closed his hand around it very gently, which was a thing she had not expected and which nearly undid her right there in front of the whole yard. "I have been sick about that grade for 24 days, he said. "You told me to go," said Adelaide. "I told you to come back," said Ezra Coulter. And behind them, up on the office steps, in the brown checked suit with the gold watch chain, Thaddeus Grismer stood in the doorway with a face like a closed drawer, and watched, and said nothing at all, and went inside. The trouble with a thing like that is that it does not settle anything. It only moves the argument. By the 11th of November, the whole town had a version. The Cornishman's letter to his brother in Baker City had got there first, and the mine crew came down for their winter stores and talked in 3 saloons, and the story went out along the Antelope Road and up the Columbia and into every wagon yard between Portland and Boise, and by the time it came back to the Dalles, it had been improved. In one version, she had carried the mortar block up the last pitch on her back. In another, she had held the whole outfit with a rope in her teeth. In the version that Adelaide hated most, and that she heard a stranger tell in the doorway of the Mercantile while she was choosing thread, she was not a person at all, but a kind of exhibit, a curiosity. The fat woman who hauled the boiler, and the man telling it did the thing with his hands out at his sides that men do, and the store laughed, and Adelaide bought her thread and paid for it and walked out past him with her chin level and did not let one thing show on her face until she was around the corner of the building, where she stood for a minute with her hand flat on the warm boards and breathed. That was the same afternoon that the editor of the county paper came around to the yard wanting to write 4 inches about it, and Grismer met him on the steps and gave him a statement, and the 4 inches that ran on Saturday said that the ironwood boiler had been delivered ahead of schedule by the Coulter and Grismer outfit under the personal supervision of the firm's superintendent. whose rigging improvements had proved decisive, and that a female relation of the junior partner had accompanied the outfit as far as the mine. Cleve Artis read it out loud in the harness shop and then put his boot through a bucket. Adelaide read it twice and folded it and put it in her trunk. She did not go up to the office, and she did not say anything to Ezra Coulter about it. And when Nan Prosser found the paper in the trunk 2 weeks later while looking for a thimble and made a noise like a kettle, Adelaide said only, "A thing that is written down is not the same as a thing that is true, and there is a mine agent in Half Moon Basin with a bill of lading in his safe." But she understood by then what she was dealing with, because Grismer had done 4 other things in that same week, and none of them were loud. He had put her on the boarding house account at full rate, which meant that the firm was charging her $4.50 a week for a bed in a room with 2 other women, and had entered it in the daybook against wages she had not been paid. He had ruled that the 20 mules she had taken to the Ketchum were to be broken up and redistributed among 4 other strings, which sounds like housekeeping, and which meant that the team she had spent 13 days teaching would never work together again. He had told Gunner Scarr that the forge was not to be used for what he called experiments without a written order. And he had gone to Ezra Coulter, privately, in the office, with the ledger open, and explained in the voice of a patient man that the ironwood contract was worth $4,700 against tonnage, and that tonnage in the first year would not cover the note on the warehouse, and that what the firm required now was steadiness and respectability and no more spectacles. Ezra Coulter came out of that meeting and went and stood in the corral for half an hour with his hand on a mule's neck. He was not a clever man in the way that Grismer was clever, and he knew it. And he had known it for 11 years, since the winter his father died, and left him half of a wagon outfit and a set of books he could not read fast enough to argue with. Thaddeus Grismer had come into the firm the following spring with capital and a clean collar and a way of saying "we," and for 11 years the arrangement had been that Ezra ran the mountains and Grismer ran the town. And for 11 years Ezra had been vaguely, steadily aware that this arrangement was costing him something he could not put a name to. He had told himself it was the price of a trade he loved. He had never once let himself finish the thought. He finished it that November, standing in a corral, because of a woman with burned boots. Miss Renner, he said that evening, on the loading dock, where they had fallen into the habit of standing at the end of the day because neither of them was capable of arranging anything more deliberate than that. "I want to say 2 things, and I am bad at both of them." "Say the first one," said Adelaide. "I have not asked you the question I brought you out here to ask," he said. "No," said Adelaide, "you have not. I am not going to ask it yet." She kept her face still. "All right," she said. "Not because of any reason you are thinking of," said Ezra Coulter, and for the first time since she had met him he sounded almost angry, though not at her. "I am not going to ask it yet, because if I ask it this month, then, for the rest of your life, every man in this county will say that the fat woman hauled a boiler to get a husband." He said the word "fat" plainly and without flinching, the way she used it herself, and she found that she could breathe. "I will not have that put on you," he said. "You did that haul as a freighter. You will get paid as a freighter, and your name will go in the book as a freighter, and when that is settled, and everybody in this town is tired of talking about it, then I will come and ask you, and you may say what you like, and I will take it." Adelaide Renner looked out at the yard for a while. "That is a great deal of arranging of my life," she said at last, "for a man who has not asked me one question." He turned his head. "I did not say I minded it," she said. "I said it was a great deal." Ezra Coulter almost smiled. "What is the second thing?" she said. He said, "Thaddeus has been at those books alone for 11 years, and I have signed what he put in front of me, and I have been telling myself all week that a man can be disagreeable and still be honest." He looked down at his hands. "I do not think that any more," he said. They did not do anything about it for 4 weeks, because the first thing that had to happen was the winter. Winter freighting out of the Dalles is a matter of hauling everything a mountain camp will need before the pass is shut, and then hauling nothing at all for 3 months, and then digging. Between the 10th of November and the 15th of December, the yard moved 411 tons. Flour, bacon, blasting powder, candles, coal oil, drill steel, hay, and one cast iron cook range weighing 900 pounds that Adelaide personally landed in the door of the ironwood bunkhouse without scratching the jamb. She made 4 trips up the Ketchum in 5 weeks. On the second one, she took Rufus Kane with her, because he asked, and on the third one, she sent Rufus Kane alone, with her rigging and her drag and her written instructions, and he came back in 6 days having done it clean, and he did not say thank you, and she did not want him to. By the second week of December, there was a thing in that yard that had not been there in October, and every man in it could feel it, and none of them would have called it by a name. Men started asking her. That was the whole of it. A driver with a bad load would come and find her and say, "Ma'am, will you look at this?" And she would walk around at once and put her hand on something and say, "Your chain is fouling the bolster, and it is going to saw that bolster in half by antelope." He began to be the person the yard walked its problems over to, in the way that in every working place there is one person who is that, and it is never the person on the office steps. Grismer noticed. Of course he noticed. He had built 11 years on being the only one who saw the whole of the yard at once, and now there was a very large woman in a canvas apron standing in the middle of it who saw more of it than he did and did not report to him. On the 18th of December he made his first serious move, and it was clever, and it very nearly worked. He did not attack her. That was the clever part. He promoted her sideways into a place where she could not be seen. On the morning of the 18th of December, a notice went up on the office wall in Grismer's small, precise hand, and it said that in view of the volume of the winter trade, the firm had engaged the services of a qualified roadmaster from Portland, a Mr. Alonzo Pettit, formerly of the Willamette Transfer Company, to commence in January, that the firm's wage book had been brought into order, and that the position of Miss A. Renner was entered as boarding-house steward and yard domestic at a wage of $2.75 the week, with board, retroactive to the 14th of October. "Boarding-house steward," said Cleavardis, reading it. It also meant, though the notice did not say so and did not have to, that the $61.40 she had earned as a freighter on the Ironwood Hall had never existed, that everything she had been doing in that yard since the 7th of November had been done as a favor, and that on the 1st of January a man from Portland with a card case would be standing where she stood. She read the notice at 7 in the morning with her coat still on. Then she took a piece of chalk out of her apron pocket, and on the board beside it, where the day's runs were marked, she wrote nothing at all, because the thing she wanted to write would not have helped, and she went out and greased 4 axles instead, lying on her back in the frost, which she had found was the best place in the world to think. By 9 o'clock she had worked out most of it, and by noon Emmett Fenn had brought her the rest. Emmett Fenn was 19 and had a bad haircut, and had spent the autumn discovering that he would walk into a river for this woman. And he had also discovered, in the way that hostlers do, that nobody in a wagon yard ever notices a boy with a bucket. He came and found her behind the harness shop with his ears scarlet. "Ma'am," he said, he was here again. "The Crail man." "Which Crail man?" "Mr. Tobias Crail himself," said Emmett. "In the office. Second time this month, and the first time was the 9th, and I know it was the 9th because I had the sorrel in the crosties." And Mr. Grismer walked him out to the gate, and they stood there, and Mr. Crail said a thing, and Mr. Grismer said a thing, and I heard the whole of it because I was in the wagon with a lantern doing the reach bolts. He swallowed. He said, "1 season." He said, "1 season, and then it is all yours anyway." And Mr. Crail said, "And the woman?" And Mr. Grismer said, "The woman is a domestic by the 1st of January." Adelaide did not move for a moment. "Emmett," she said, "can you write?" "Some. Then tonight, when nobody is in the office, you will not go in there," she said, "because that is stealing and I will not have you doing it. But tomorrow morning you will bring the day book out to the dock for me the way you always do, and you will set it down and go away, and that is not stealing, because that book is half owned by the man I came out here for, and he can look at his own book any hour he likes. The Freight Men's Dinner at the Umatilla House was held every year on the 20th of December, and it was the one night of the year when the trade in that country put on collars and sat down together. Every wagon outfit between the Cascades and the Blue Mountains had a table. There were commission men from Portland and 2 mine agents and the man from the railroad and the county judge, and there was roast beef and oysters that had come up on ice, and there were speeches, and there was a good deal of whiskey, and afterward there was business, because the whole point of it was the afterward. The Coulter and Grismer table was set for 4. Grismer had entered the names himself: T. Grismer, E. Coulter, A. Pettit of Portland, and 1 guest. He came out onto the loading dock at 4 o'clock on the 20th to say so. Adelaide was up on a wagon bed with a chain hook, working, and she came down when he spoke, because she did not intend to have this conversation from above him. "I say it now so that there is no awkwardness later," said Grismer. "The dinner is a business occasion, and the firm is represented by its principals. I am aware that certain people have been telling you that you have a standing here. You have not. You have a bed and a plate and a wage that is more than generous for the work. And after the 1st of January you will have a proper place under Mr. Pettit, and if you are sensible, you will be grateful." "Mr. Grismer," said Adelaide, "do you know what I have been thinking about all day?" He waited with visible patience. "I have been thinking that you have never once said the true thing," she said. "Not in 2 months. In October you said the firm required a woman of ordinary proportions. That was not true, because there is no such requirement written anywhere, and no customer of this house has ever asked for one. In November you told the newspaper that the rigging was yours. That was not true either, and you knew when you said it that Mr. Halstead reads that paper. And this notice on the wall is not true, because I did not come here to be a steward, and there is a bill of lading in a safe in Half Moon Basin with my name on it as the freighter of record, and you have known that since the 11th. She wiped her hands on the canvas apron, unhurried. "You are a great liar, Mr. Grismer," she said, "and the strange thing about it is that you are not a bold one. You are the kind that lies in small pieces and hopes nobody puts them beside each other." Grismer's face went the color of a plate. "You will be off this property by the 1st of January, he said. Then he turned and went up the steps, and Adelaide went back to the chain hook, and at 6 o'clock, when the lamps went on all along the riverfront and the Umatilla house lit up like a stove, she washed her face and her hands and her forearms and put on the one good dress she owned, which was a dark green wool that her mother had made over for her in 1881 and which she had let out twice herself, and she brushed her hair and pinned it. And she walked down 2nd Street and up the steps of the Umatilla house and in through the double doors into a dining room with 140 men in it. The room did what rooms do. She had, by that point in her life, walked into perhaps 400 rooms, and she knew the exact shape of the silence and the exact length of it, and she had learned that the whole battle is fought in the first 6 seconds and is won by not stopping. She did not stop. She crossed that dining room at an ordinary walking pace, past the Crail brothers' table and the commission men and the county judge, and she stopped at the Coulter and Grismer table where 3 men were sitting, and Ezra Coulter came up out of his chair so fast that he knocked his own glass over. The 4th place was set. Grismer had entered 1 guest, and the guest was a wheat broker's wife he had invited to make a point. "Ma'am," said Ezra Coulter, and pulled the chair out. "Sit down, Ezra," said Grismer, low. Ezra Coulter did not sit down. He stood there holding the chair with 140 men watching, and Adelaide Renner looked at him and understood, with a sinking feeling, that whatever happened in the next minute was going to be the story, and that if she sat down in that chair, the story would be that a big man had made room for her. So she did not sit down either. She said, in a voice pitched to carry to the corners of that room, because she had spent 13 days learning to be heard over 20 mules, Mr. Crail. "I am told you are at that table by the window." The room turned. Tobias Crail was a heavy, affable, well-barbered man of 60 with a diamond in his shirt front, and he stood up out of pure surprise and said, "Madam, I am." "Then I will say my business in front of everybody," said Adelaide, "since it is a business dinner. You have been twice this month to our office. You are after the ironwood contract, and you will have it in a year if a certain thing happens. And I have a proposition for you that will settle it in 4 days instead, and every freight man in this room can witness it. And I would rather that than another 6 months of talk." The room was entirely silent now. Somebody at the back set down a fork very carefully. "The ironwood second stamp battery is sitting on the dock," she said. 5 mortar blocks, a flywheel, and the shafting. 26,000 pounds in all, and it has got to be at Half Moon Basin before that pass shuts, which gives anybody who wants it about 11 days. Mr. Halstead has been trying to get somebody to take it since the 1st of the month and has had no offers, which I expect you know. She let that sit. "Put your best man on half of it," she said. "I will take the other half. Same day out of this yard, same road, same grade. Whichever outfit lands its half on the ironwood floor first, that outfit takes the ironwood freight for 1885, and the other one signs off it in writing, tonight, on this table, before the judge." Tobias Crail looked at her for a long moment, and then he did a thing that raised him considerably in her estimation, which was to laugh out loud with real enjoyment. "Madam," he said, "who in God's name are you?" "I am the freighter of record," said Adelaide Renner. It was written out on the back of a bill of fare at the Umatilla House at 20 minutes past 9 on the night of the 20th of December, and the county judge, who had drunk exactly enough to enjoy himself and not enough to be careless, read it aloud twice before he would let anybody sign it. The terms were these: "The Ironwood Mining Company's second stamp battery, 26,000 pounds in all, to be divided into 2 equal halves by weight, the halves to be drawn for by lot in the freight yard at daylight. Both outfits to pull out of the Dalles on the same morning, the 22nd of December. Same road, same grade, no relay teams laid out in advance, no man from one outfit to lay a hand on the other's load. The first half landed on the ironwood mill floor takes the ironwood freight for the season of 1885, and the loser signs off it." And a clause that Adelaide added herself, and that Tobias Crail agreed to without blinking, which was that if either outfit came upon the other in trouble on that grade, help was to be given, and giving it was not to count against the giver. "I put that in for my own sake," she said, when Crail raised an eyebrow at it. "I have been on that road. I will not stand and watch a man go over the side for $4,000, and I do not intend to spend 11 miles hoping I will not have to decide." Tobias Crail signed his name. Ezra Coulter signed his, and then the judge turned the card and said, "And for the firm of Coulter and Grismer, the other principal," and held out the pen, and the whole room looked at Thaddeus Grismer. He could not refuse. That was the beauty of it, and Adelaide had built the entire evening on it. 140 freight men had just heard a proposition that put his own firm's contract at hazard against a woman he had entered in the wage book as a domestic, and if he refused to sign it in front of them, he was refusing to back his own house. He signed. His hand was steady and his face was pleasant, and Adelaide, watching from 4 feet away, saw the one small thing that gave him away, which was that he did not look at Tobias Crail even once, not when the card went across the table, not when Crail's man took it up, not at all. A man who has no arrangement with another man will look at him, she thought. It is the ones who have an arrangement who cannot. They drew for the halves at daylight on the 21st in the yard with 100 people standing along the fence, which is a thing that had never happened at a freight draw in that town before, and which happened 3 more times in the next 4 years because of that morning. Emmett Fenn held the hat. Crail Brothers drew the flywheel and the shafting, and 1 mortar block, a big awkward round load, 13,000 pounds, top heavy and hard to chain. Coulter and Grismer drew 4 mortar blocks, 13,000 pounds of solid cast iron in 4 pieces, dense and low and stubborn, the kind of load that does not shift and does not forgive. "I would have taken either," said Adelaide, and meant it. Crayle's man was a Missourian named Hollis Pruitt, 44 years old, small and dry and quick, with pale eyes and a reputation from the Caribou Road, and he came across the yard that morning and looked at her load and then at her. "They tell me you stood on a brake beam," he said. "I did." Hollis Pruitt nodded slowly. "I have been driving 29 years, he said, "and I have got 151 pounds to do it with, and I have wished for more of it on a grade about 4,000 times. He put out his hand. "Do not let anybody make this ugly, ma'am," he said. "It does not have to be ugly." She had a day and a night to rig, and she used all of it. The 4 mortar blocks went 2 and 2 on the coupled wagons, and she set them herself, and it took 9 hours. She would not chain a casting down onto bare planking, because iron on wood on a grade works itself loose no matter how tight the chain is. So she had Gunner Scar cut oak bearing blocks, and she bedded each casting into a socket of oak with the grain crossed, and then she chained across the top in a figure that Scar had never seen, and that he drew on the shop wall in charcoal afterward and left there for 11 years. She set the weight forward of the axle, hard forward, further than anybody in that yard would have dared. She had 2 drags this time, 1 for each wagon. She had the rough lock and a second rough lock. She had 2 spare brake beams of green oak lashed under the bed, cut and bored and ready, which took Scar a whole night, and which was the single decision that mattered most and that nobody noticed at the time. And she had the mules. Grismer had broken up her string in November and scattered them through 4 other teams, and she had not said a word about it then. She said a word about it now, at 4 in the afternoon on the 21st, standing in the middle of the yard with the whole outfit listening. "I want the 20 I took in October," she said. "Every one, by name, because a mule that has been up that grade with the woman who is asking him to go up it again is worth 2 mules that have not, and there is not one thing you can do about that with a whip." "They are assigned," said Grismer. "Then unassign them," said Ezra Coulter, from the dock, not loudly. She got them. She walked into 4 corrals and cut them out herself, and she knew all 20 by name and by sound, and when she came to the near wheeler, a big dun with a scarred hip called Deacon, the mule put his head over her shoulder and leaned on her, and Adelaide Renner stood there in the cold with 350 pounds of mule resting its whole head on her, and let it, for longer than she needed to. She slept 4 hours. At 2 in the morning, she was out at the wagons with a lantern going over every bolt with her hands, and that was where Ezra Coulter found her. He came out of the dark in the fur-collared coat with 2 tin cups and a coffee pot, and set them on the wagon tongue, and poured, and neither of them said anything for a while, which was the thing she had come to like best about him. Then he said, Thaddeus signed that card, and did not look at Crayle. "I saw it," said Adelaide. "I have been 11 years not seeing things," said Ezra Coulter. He turned the cup around in his hand. "I went into the office tonight, and I took down the book for 1882, which he does not keep in the desk. He keeps it in the press with the tariffs." He looked up. "I cannot read a column fast," he said, "but I can read a name, and I can read a figure. And there is a payment of $600 out of this firm in March of '83 to a party in Portland that I never heard of, and there is another in '84. And I have carried this outfit over 4 mountain ranges for 11 years, and I have never once had $600 of my own at one time." Adelaide set down her lantern. "Ezra," she said, "do not do anything about that until this is over." He looked at her. "Because if you go at him now, he will say, 'You have been put up to it by me,'" she said, "and every man in this county will believe him, because that is the shape of the story they are already telling." She put her hand flat on the wagon bed. "Let me haul this," she said. "Let me haul it in front of the whole trade with his name on the card as the man who backed me. And then we open that book with the judge in the room, and there will not be one soul who says a woman talked you into it." Ezra Coulter looked at her for a long moment in the lantern light. "You have got a mind like a switchback," he said. "I have got a mind like a woman that has been talked about since she was 11, said Adelaide. "It is the same thing." They pulled out of the yard at 6:30 on the morning of the 22nd of December in a hard, clear cold, both outfits together, and half the town came down to watch it, and the editor of the county paper stood on a barrel. Hollis Pruitt went out the gate first by about a minute, with the flywheel riding high and chained, and his 18 mules stepping short. Adelaide Renner came out behind him with 4 mortar blocks bedded in oak and 20 mules leaning into it, walking at the head of the near-wheeler with her hand on Deacon's neck, in the slate-blue dress and the canvas apron and a heavy coat, and 100 people along the fence, and she did not wave and did not look at them, because she was reading the road 100 yards ahead the way she had learned to. Grismer watched from the office steps until both outfits were out of sight down the Antelope Road. Then he went inside, and sat down at his desk and wrote a short letter and sealed it, and gave it to a rider to take to Half Moon Basin by the North Trail, which is a way a man can go on a good horse in 3 days, and which no wagon can use at all. Hollis Pruitt beat her on the flat, and she had known he would. 13,000 pounds of flywheel and shafting rides higher and rolls easier than 13,000 pounds of solid casting. And Pruitt was a fast man with a light hand who had been doing it for 29 years, and by the end of the 2nd day he was 4 miles ahead, and by the end of the 4th he was most of a day. Adelaide let him go. She had built the whole run around one sentence that she said to Cleve Artis and Emmett Fenn on the first night, which was, "He is going to be ahead of me for 4 days, and then the road is going to change, and if we spend those 4 days trying to be him, we will arrive at the Ketchum with tired mules and a loose load, and we are not going to do that." So they went at the pace the blocks wanted. 15 miles the first day, 17, 16, 18. She stopped every second hour and walked the length of the load with her bare hand on every chain, feeling for the chain that had begun to breathe. She found one on the 2nd morning, on the off side of the trail wagon, where the oak socket had crushed a 1/16 of an inch and let the whole block settle, and she took 40 minutes and a maul and 2 wedges and made it right. And Emmett Fenn, who was watching the light go and thinking about the day they were losing, said, "Ma'am, 40 minutes?" And Adelaide said, "That 1/16 of an inch is 900 feet from now," and he never asked her again about a stop as long as he lived. They came to the foot of the Ketchum on the afternoon of the 26th of December in bright, hard cold, with the pines black, and the rock above the timber gray, and the snow only in the shadows so far, and Pruitt's wheel marks were in the road ahead of them, and they were most of a day old. They went up the first pitch that evening in the last hour of light, doubled, with the rough lock on, and camped on the bench at the top. And Adelaide sat by the fire until 11 o'clock, with her boots off, going over the 2nd pitch in her head, foot by foot, from memory, and she said to nobody in particular, "He has got that flywheel standing on edge in a cradle," and Cleve Artis, who was almost asleep, said, "What of it?" and she said, "On the 3rd pitch the road tips outward for about 90 yards. And lay down, and did not sleep well. They heard it at 10 minutes past 9 the next morning. It is a sound that everybody who has worked a mountain road knows and nobody can describe. It is not a crash. It is a long, grinding complaint with a rhythm in it, like something enormous walking backward, and it went out across the whole face of the Ketchum and came back off the rock wall twice. And every mule in the string threw its head up. Adelaide had her outfit standing and chocked in the drag down inside of 30 seconds, and then she went up that road on foot at a run, which is not a thing that a woman of 310 pounds does gracefully, and which she did anyway, 400 yards uphill, with her coat open and her lungs burning, and Cleve Artis came behind her, and Emmett Fenn came behind him. It had happened exactly where she had said it would. The road tipped outward for 90 yards, and the flywheel had come off its edge in the cradle, and once it went it had taken the whole balance of the load with it, and the wagon had slewed and run back and struck the inside bank and jackknifed, and the trail wagon had come around across the road with its outside wheels a yard from nothing at all. One mule was down and screaming in the harness. 2 of Pruitt's 3 men were trying to get to the head of the string, and Hollis Pruitt was on the ground on the inside of the road with the near front wheel of the jackknifed wagon standing on his right leg above the knee, and about 6,000 pounds of that load bearing down through it, and he was not making any noise at all, which was worse than if he had been. His swamper was heaving on a fence rail with both hands and getting nothing. Adelaide Renner came into that wreck and did not shout and did not stop moving. "Cut that mule out," she said. "Artis, the mule, now, and then get his head. Fen, chock the off rear wheel with anything you can lift, and then get behind me and do not touch me." She was already going down the road bank. There was a 10-foot iron-shod pry bar lashed under Pruitt's wagon, and she got it out with one pull and dragged it up, and then she looked for the fulcrum, and there was nothing there, no rock, no block, and she said, Fen and Emmett Fen came with the oak-bearing block off her own load that he had been carrying since somebody told him to, and that nobody had told him to. And she looked at that boy for 1/2 of 1 second, and then set it. She put the bar under the axle housing, not the felloe, because a felloe will split and an axle housing will not, and she set the oak block under the bar at 11 inches, which gave her a lever 10 feet on the long side, and then she went out to the end of it and put both hands on it and put every pound she had on this earth onto the end of that bar. 6,000 pounds is not lifted. 6,000 pounds is persuaded. She came down on that bar with 310 pounds, and it did not move. So she came down on it again and put her chest on it and drove with her legs, and something in the wreck creaked, and she said through her teeth again, and Cleve Artis got on the bar beside her with his good arm, and the swamper got on it. And Adelaide Renner walked her own weight out to the last 8 inches of that bar and sat her whole body down on it. The wheel came up 1.5 inches. "Pull him," she said, and the swamper had Hollis Pruitt by the shoulders and dragged him out from under it, and Adelaide held that bar down for 4 more seconds after he was clear, because she could not be sure. And then she came off it, and the wheel dropped and hit the road, and the whole wagon shuddered. Then she got up and did the next thing, because there is always a next thing. They spent that whole day and half of the night on the Ketchum, putting Hollis Pruitt's outfit back on the road. The leg was broken clean above the knee, and Cleve Artis set it with 2 barrel staves, and Pruitt swore for 11 minutes without repeating himself, and then passed out, which everybody agreed was the best available outcome. They got the down mule up, and it lived. They took the flywheel out of the cradle entirely, on rollers, down onto the road, and Adelaide rebuilt the cradle flat on its side with an oak crossbeam so the wheel lay over instead of standing on edge, and she said to Pruitt's swamper, "It will overhang the bed 9 inches on each side, and you will hate it, and it will not come off." And then they rolled 13,000 pounds back up onto a wagon bed with 2 jacks and 11 feet of skid timber and 6 people, of whom one was a very large woman doing the work of 3. It was 1:30 in the morning when Pruitt's outfit was standing chocked and sound with a man on watch, and Adelaide walked back down 400 yards of road to her own camp in the dark, and sat down on the wagon tongue, and found that both her hands had stopped working properly, and sat there flexing them for 10 minutes before she could get her coat off. They were now 1 full day and 11 hours behind, on the 28th of December, with 3 pitches of the Ketchum left, and a mine agent 17 miles away who would begin closing his books on the 1st of January. "Ma'am," said Emmett Fen, very carefully, out of the dark, "we could have gone around him. There is room at the pull-out. He said help was to be given, but nobody said all day." "I know it," said Adelaide. "We might have took the whole thing by 2 days." "I know it," said Adelaide. She looked at her hands. "Emmett," she said. In about 40 years, you are going to be an old man sitting in front of a stove, and every single day of that you will get to choose what you sat in front of that stove remembering. That is the only thing a person really owns. She flexed the right hand. I am not going to sit there remembering that I drove past Hollis Pruitt. Then she said, and anyway we are going to beat him, and lay down and slept 5 hours. What she did in the next 3 days became, in that country, a thing people said instead of a number. She went up the second pitch and the third pitch on the 29th, both of them. Doubled, which meant she covered every foot of that road 3 times, which meant that a woman of 310 pounds walked and climbed 31 miles in one day at 11,000 feet of switchback while handling 20 mules and 13,000 pounds of cast iron. She did the fourth pitch on the 30th in the dark, with lanterns hung on the standards, which no freighter in that country had ever done on the Ketchum, and which 2 of them tried within the year, and 1 of them regretted. On the fourth pitch, at the same broken place where she had stood on a beam in October, the new near beam took it without a murmur, because she had cut it green and bored it herself and put 11 bolts in it. And on the morning of the 31st of December, at the top, where the road comes over the saddle and starts down into Half Moon Basin, they came around the last rock shoulder and found the road gone. Not washed out, fallen in on. A slab had come off the wall above in the freeze and lay in the road in 4 pieces with 100 smaller ones around it, and the biggest of the 4 was about the size of a cook stove and sat squarely on the outside wheel track with 100 feet of air past it. Cleve Artis said a word. Adelaide Renner got down off the wagon and looked at it for perhaps 90 seconds. Then she said, "Get me the bar." They moved that slide by hand in 5 hours and 40 minutes, and there were 3 of them. And 1 had a bad arm, and 1 was 19 years old. The small stone went first, and the small stone is most of the work in any slide, because there is always 4 times more of it than a person believes, and every piece of it has to be picked up and carried and thrown, and after the first hour your fingers stop closing. Adelaide worked with her coat off in 20 degrees and steam coming off her shoulders. She carried the pieces that were too big for the others, 1 to a trip, held against her chest, and there were 60 or 70 of those, and at the end of it Emmett Fenn said that he had watched her pick up a stone that he could not have rolled. Then there were the 3 middle pieces, and those went over the side on skids with the bar. Then there was the one the size of a cook stove. She could not get it to the outside because the outside was where it already was, and she could not break it because she had nothing to break it with. And she could not go around it, because there was 3 feet of road on the inside and a wall on the other side of that. So she went at it the way she had gone at everything since she was 16 years old, which was to find out what it actually weighed and then arrange the world until that number stopped mattering. She dug. She got a shovel and a pick off the wagon, and she dug the road out from under the downhill lip of that stone for 2 hours, kneeling and then lying on her side in the frozen scree, 1 shovelful at a time, until she had made a trench under the front of it 4 feet long and 18 inches deep, and then she set 2 skid poles into the trench at an angle. And then she put the 10-foot bar in behind it with the oak block for a fulcrum, and she and Artis and Fenn, all 3, got on the long end. Nothing. Twice, the 3rd time she sent them off it. "Get behind me," she said, "and hold the mules," and she braced her boots and took the bar in both hands at the last 8 inches and lifted her feet off the ground. 310 pounds went down onto a 10-foot lever with an 11-inch bite, and the stone that had been sitting in that road since before the Republic came up out of its bed with a sound like a door opening in a church, and rolled onto the skids and went over the edge, and they heard it hit twice a long way down, and then not again. Cleve Artis sat down in the road. "Ma'am," he said, "in September I said a thing to you about that boiler. I want to say a different thing now, and then I am not going to say anything else about it for the rest of my life." He looked at the empty place in the road. "Every man in this trade spends his whole career wishing he was heavier on a grade," he said. "Every one of us. It is the oldest complaint there is, and they have been laughing at you in that yard since October for the exact thing that is the only reason any of us is going to see the 1st of January. I have thought about that a good deal, said Adelaide, getting her coat. Get up, Mr. Artis. We are 11 miles from the mill floor, and it is going downhill, and downhill is the part that kills people. They came into Half Moon Basin at 20 minutes to 4 in the afternoon on the 31st of December, 1884. She took the whole descent on the drags and the rough locks with the mules doing nothing but steering, and twice on the steep she stood out on the brake beam with her whole weight and rode it down like that with the smoke coming off the maple. And the second time she did it, Emmett Fenn stopped being frightened and started laughing, which is a thing that happens to people on mountains and which he could not explain afterward at all. The Ironwood Mill was a raw new building of unpainted fir with a floor of laid stone and 11 anchor pockets standing open in it, and the boiler she had brought in October was already set alongside with its stack up and its brickwork done, and there were 30 men working on the mill when the outfit came down the Basin Road, and they stopped working. Adelaide Renner brought 20 mules and 2 coupled wagons and 4 mortar blocks in through the mill doors, which had been built wide for exactly this, and which nobody had believed would be used before spring, and set the lead wagon alongside the anchor pockets and set the brake, and got down. Ironwood Mining Company, she said. 4 mortar blocks. 13,000 pounds. Delivered the 31st of December. Orrin Halstead came across that mill floor at a speed that no tidy man in city clothes should attempt on wet stone. "Where is Pruitt?" he said. "Behind me on the 4th pitch with a broken leg," said Adelaide, "and his load is sound and his outfit is standing, and he will be down here tomorrow noon or a little after, and I want that written down in your book exactly that way, Mr. Halstead, because the man did nothing wrong. That flywheel was chained on edge by somebody in Portland who never saw the Ketchum, and Hollis Pruitt inherited it, and if he had drawn my half, he would have beaten me by 2 days, and I will say that in any room in this state." Halstead was already writing. He arrived, in fact, at 1 in the afternoon on the 1st of January, riding on a mattress in his own trail wagon with his leg in barrel staves, swearing at his swamper about the 9 inches of overhang, and when they carried him into the mill and he saw the 4 mortar blocks already down in their pockets with the anchor bolts run up, Hollis Pruitt lay back on the mattress and shut his eyes and said, in the voice of a man being told a thing he already knew, "Well, of course she did." Then he had them prop him up, and he asked for the judge's card, and Tobias Crail's clerk brought it, and Hollis Pruitt signed the losing side of it himself in a firm hand, and then he asked for a pencil and wrote 4 more lines underneath his name. "I want it on the paper," he said, "since paper is what this trade runs on. On the 27th of December, on the 3rd pitch of the Ketchum, I was under my own wheel with 6,000 pound on my leg, and my own 2 men could not raise it. And Miss Adelaide Renner raised it with a bar and her own weight and pulled me out, and then lost a day and a half of a race she was already behind in putting my load back on the road, and then went on and beat me by 21 hours anyway." He handed back the pencil. "Now," he said, "somebody get me some whiskey, and somebody else get me off this mountain." It should have ended there. It very nearly did. What happened instead was that Orrin Halstead, having written everything down, put his pencil away and looked at Adelaide with an expression she did not immediately understand, and said, "Madam, come into the office." The Ironwood office was a plank room with a stove and a safe and a window that looked at rock. Halstead shut the door and went to the desk and took up a letter that had been lying there since the 27th and did not hand it to her at once. "A rider came in from the Dalles by the North Trail 4 days ago," he said. "He was paid for speed, and he made it in 3. This is from the superintendent of your firm." He read it out. It said that the firm of Coulter and Grismer wished to place on record, in advance of any communication the agent might receive from other parties, that the person calling herself the freighter of record on the Ironwood bill of lading was in the firm's employ as a boarding-house steward and yard domestic at a wage of $2.75 the week. that she held no authority of any kind to bind the firm, that any wager, undertaking, or agreement she might have entered into at a public dinner or elsewhere was made without the firm's sanction and was void, that the firm regretted the embarrassment, and that in the event of any dispute arising over the ironwood freight for the season of 1885, the firm would be entirely willing to see the business placed with Crail Brothers, whose facilities the superintendent had personally inspected and could recommend. There was a silence in that plank room. "He signed the card," said Adelaide at last, "in front of 140 men and a county judge. He signed it, and then he wrote a letter around the mountain to unsign it." "That is what it appears to be," said Halstead. "And it went out of that yard on the 22nd, said Adelaide slowly, "which is the morning we pulled. Before either outfit had gone 11 miles. Mr. Halstead, he did not write that because he thought I would lose." She looked up. "He wrote it because he did not know which one of us would win. And he had made an arrangement that only pays him if this house loses the contract, and he needed a paper on your desk that worked either way." Orrin Halstead sat down behind the desk and folded his hands. "Madam," he said, "I have been the agent of this company for 9 years, and I have seen every kind of thievery a freight yard can produce, and I will tell you what I have never seen. I have never seen a man put in writing to a customer that he would be willing to see the business go to a competitor. He tapped the letter. That is not a superintendent protecting his firm from an embarrassment. That is a man building himself a reason." He turned the letter around on the desk and pushed it toward her. "Take it," he said. "I cannot take a letter addressed to you. You can take a true copy attested by me and witnessed by my machinist and my clerk," said Halstead, "and you will have the original by mail to your county judge inside of 2 weeks, and I will come down to that town myself in the spring and say it out loud in any room you like." He was already reaching for paper. "Madam," he said, "I do not do this out of chivalry, and I want you to understand that, because I think you would like it better. I do it because I have got $111,000 of machinery in that basin and a partner in San Francisco who reads the papers, and the safest thing I own on this mountain right now is the fact that the person who hauls my freight will lose a day and a half to get a competitor out from under a wheel." Adelaide Renner took the copy when it was made and folded it twice, and put it inside her dress against her ribs, where it stayed for 4 days and 84 miles. She came down out of the mountains on the 4th of January and into the Dalles on the 6th, and this time nobody took their hat off, because this time the whole town already knew. The news having come down ahead of her with a Crail Brothers rider and a mine crew and 2 commissioned men, and a town that knows a thing does not stand in reverent lines. A town that knows a thing crowds. There were people on the fence. There were people on the warehouse roof. Somebody had run up 2 flags on the corral posts for reasons nobody was ever able to explain. Rufus Kane and Gunner Scarr came out and took the mules from her at the gate without being asked, and Nan Prosser came across the yard at a dead run at 4'11" and threw both arms as far around Adelaide as they went, which was not very far, and hung on. Ezra Coulter was not there. He was in the office, and the office door was shut, and there was a light on behind the shade at 2 in the afternoon. Adelaide walked up those steps still in her road coat, with her hands wrapped in flour sacking, and opened the door without knocking, and found 4 men and a table. Ezra Coulter was standing with his back to the press, which was open. The county judge was in the customer's chair with his hat on his knee. There was a lawyer named Purvis from 2nd Street with a portfolio, and Thaddeus Grismer was behind his own desk, in the brown checked suit with the green waistcoat and the gold watch chain, sitting very upright, and he had been talking for some time, and he had been talking well. "You will pardon me, madam," he said, the moment she was through the door. "We are engaged." "Sit down, Miss Renner," said the judge. "I have been 3 days on a road," said Adelaide, "and I do not think I ought to sit on that chair in these clothes." "Then stand." "And welcome," said the judge, "and let me tell you where we are, because it is your business more than anybody's. Mr. Coulter came to me on the 23rd of December with a ledger for 1882 and 1883 that he could not read and did not like the look of, and I sent for Purvis, and Purvis has been at it for a fortnight." "Under protest," said Grismer. "Under protest," agreed the judge comfortably. "Go on, Purvis." The lawyer opened the portfolio. He was a dry man with a cold, and he read the way a man reads a fence line. There were, he said, 11 payments over 3 years out of the firm's account to a party in Portland entered variously as commission, agency, and forwarding, totaling $3,840. The party is a firm of forwarding agents on Front Street. That firm has one principal. His name is Lucius Crail. He is the younger brother of Tobias Crail, and he has been the Portland agent of Crail Brothers since 1880. There is no record in this office of any service performed for any of those payments, and Mr. Grismer has been unable this afternoon to describe one. "I have described the practice," said Grismer. "Forwarding commissions are customary, and I will not be cross-examined on the customs of a trade by a man who has never rolled a wheel." "There is more," said Purvis, and turned a page. "In February of 1883, the firm declined a bid on the Cross Hollows wool haul, entered in the daybook as declined, teams unavailable. The teams were in this yard. Crail Brothers took it. In November of 1883, the firm's bid on the county road contract was submitted 11 days late and was entered as posted the 4th. The post office stamp on the retained copy is the 15th. Crail Brothers took it. In April of 1884, the firm surrendered the Beethoven mail freight for what is entered as insufficient stock." He looked up over his spectacles. "This yard had 41 head of stock in April," he said. Crail Brothers took it. The stove ticked. "And in July of 1884, said Purvis, the firm placed, through an agency in St. Louis, a matrimonial advertisement at a cost to the firm of $11 on behalf of the junior partner, without the junior partner's knowledge of the terms." Adelaide's chin came up. "Read it," said the judge. Purvis read it. It was 6 lines long. It described a prosperous freighting firm at the Dalles, Oregon, and a partner of good character and property, and it specified that applicants should be of ordinary figure, personable, of an age not exceeding 24, and of an appearance suitable to a house of standing, and it said that photographs were required. "I never seen that," said Ezra Coulter. His voice had gone very quiet, which in him was not a good sign. "I wrote to 2 names the agency sent on, and the second one wrote back true and plain, and I paid her passage out of my own pocket." He looked at Grismer. "Thaddeus, what did you want out of it?" "I wanted a partner with a settled home and a wife who could be looked at," said Grismer. "No," said Adelaide. Every head in that room turned. "I am sorry, Judge," she said, "but I have had 11 weeks of this man, and I have got a thing to say, and I am the only person here who has stood in front of him with nothing at all in my hand, so I would like to say it." She unwrapped the flower sacking off her right hand, slowly because it had stuck in 2 places, and set the sacking on the corner of the desk. Mr. Grismer did not want his partner settled. He wanted his partner married to somebody the whole town would laugh at. Grismer's face did not move, but something went out of it. "Because it is not enough to take a firm's business away from it in pieces," said Adelaide. "A man notices that eventually, even a man who cannot read a column, but nobody notices anything about a man that the town has decided is a joke. That is the whole use of a joke." He looked at Ezra. If he had come out of that yard in 1885 with a wife that this county laughed about, there would not have been one customer between here and Boise who took him serious enough to check a figure. And the pieces could have gone on coming off this house for 4 more years, and when there was nothing left, Mr. Grismer would have bought the name for $1 and sold it to Portland. She turned back. "That is what you wanted," she said. "You did not want an ordinary woman. You wanted an advertisement that would fetch you a girl of 24 with a photograph, because a girl of 24 with a photograph would have been on the down boat inside of a month and left him ridiculous twice. Thaddeus Grismer said in a flat voice, "This is a fantasy." "Then here is a paper," said Adelaide, and took the folded copy out of her dress and laid it on the desk in front of the judge, and it was warm, and everybody in the room saw that it was warm. The judge read it out loud. All of it. The part about the boarding-house steward, and the part about no authority to bind the firm, and the part about the wager being void, and the last part, the part about the firm being entirely willing to see the business placed with Crail Brothers, whose facilities the superintendent had personally inspected and could recommend. Then he put it down and looked at Thaddeus Grismer over the top of his spectacles for about 11 seconds. "Mr. Grismer," he said, "I have known you 9 years, and you have always struck me as the ablest man in this town at everything except one thing, and I did not know what the one thing was until this minute." He tapped the paper. "You cannot leave a thing alone. You had signed that card in front of me and 140 men. Your firm's contract was at hazard either way, and you had every right in the world to sit in this office and wait and be disappointed like a gentleman. And instead, you paid a writer $40 to carry a letter around a mountain on the same morning, because you could not bear the risk that it might go well." He handed the copy to Purvis. "That letter is the only piece of paper in this business that you wrote entirely by yourself, and it is going to be the end of you." They were 4 hours at it after that, and most of it was tedious, and Adelaide sat down eventually on the woodbox by the stove because her legs would not do it any longer. The end of it was this. Purvis had the articles of the partnership on the table by 5 o'clock, and there was a clause in them, put in by Ezra Coulter's father in 1871, that either partner might be required to sell at valuation on proof of an act against the interest of the firm. Grismer fought it for 2 hours on the ground that the payments were commissions and that the letter was an act of prudence. The judge listened to all of it with great courtesy, and then said that any man was entitled to argue his case, and that Mr. Grismer would have every opportunity to argue this one in a courtroom in April before a jury of freight men, and that in the meantime he would like Mr. Purvis to read out the Bokovan entry once more. Slowly, Grismer sold at valuation on the 9th of January, 1885. He got $4,100 for a half interest that he had spent 3 years hollowing out, which was more than it was worth, and considerably more than he deserved, and Ezra Coulter borrowed against the warehouse and the tie grass to pay it, and it took him until 1889 to be clear of that note. "He was worth it," said Ezra, signing. "Nobody was ever quite sure what happened to Thaddeus Grismer. He left on the down boat on the 11th, which was a Sunday, with 2 trunks, and the last anybody in that country heard of him, he was clerking for a wholesale grocer in Sacramento, and had let it be known that he had formerly been a partner in a large transportation concern in Oregon, which was true, and which was the smallest true thing he ever said. Tobias Crail came to the yard himself on the 12th of January, alone, on foot, and stood in the middle of it with his hat in his hand until somebody fetched Ezra Coulter out. I did not know the half of it, he said, which was probably a lie, and my brother has been read to about it, which was certainly not. Then he said the thing he had actually walked up there to say, which was, Pruitt will not drive again this year, and I have got the Bakeoven mail, and no man for it, and I would take it kindly if your Miss Renner would come and look at my south grade and tell me why I break an axle on it twice a season. She went the following Tuesday and told him, and he paid her $11 for the afternoon, and it was the first money she ever earned in the state of Oregon that came from being asked. The wage book was settled on the 15th of January, and it took Purvis and Adelaide 4 hours and a great deal of arguing, because Ezra Coulter's first proposal was that she should simply be given a third of the firm, and Adelaide refused it flatly and would not be moved. Not like that, she said. Not as a present out of a man's hand while this town is still deciding what I am. You will pay me what a freighter is paid, and you will pay it out of the book where anybody can look at it, and when I have earned enough of it to buy in, I will buy in, and Mr. Purvis will draw the paper, and I will pay you in money. That will take 4 years, said Ezra. "Then it will take 4 years," said Adelaide. So it was entered. Freighter's wages at $70 the month with a tonnage bonus on the Ketchum runs, backdated to the 14th of October, and the boarding house entry struck out with a line through it that Purvis drew and Adelaide asked him to draw again heavier. She was owed, when it was reckoned, $241.60, which was more money than she had ever had at one time in her life by a factor of about 11, and she took it in a canvas sack to the bank on 2nd Street and opened an account in the name of A. Renner and walked out onto the sidewalk and stood there for a minute in the cold looking at the passbook. Then she went and bought 2 things. She bought a pair of boots made to her own foot by a man on Court Street who measured her without one word of comment and who got, in consequence, every dollar of boot money she ever spent for the next 30 years. And she bought paper and a stamp, and she went back to the yard and sat down at the end of the loading dock on a crate and wrote to her father. It was not an easy letter, and it took her 3 tries. In the first one she told him everything, and it came out boastful. In the second one, she told him nothing, and it came out cold. The third one said that she had arrived safe on the 14th of October, that Oregon was drier than she had expected, and the wind never stopped, that she was working as a freighter for a firm that hauled to the mines, that she had taken a load up a mountain that 3 men had failed on, and had been paid $241 for the season's work, that there was a bank account in her name, and that the man who had written to him in August was a good man and had not once been ashamed of her in front of anybody. Then she added a last line, because she had thought about it for 3 days and had decided that a thing not said in a family is a thing that grows. She wrote, "You never said one word against me in 28 years, and I want you to know I have been grateful for that my whole life, and I also want you to know that it would have been worth a great deal to me if you had said one word for me out loud, in front of them, one time. I am not angry. I am telling you because you are going to write back, and I would like the letter to be about something true." He wrote back in March. It was 4 lines long, and the hand shook, and the third line said, "I was proud of you at the hay scale in '81, and I did not say it because Emile and Wesley were standing there, and that was a coward's reason, and I have known it for 4 years." She read it 11 times and put it in the trunk beside the newspaper clipping, and she did not cry over it until June, in a wagon, alone, 40 miles from anywhere, which she felt was about the right place. Ezra Coulter asked her on the 28th of February. He had spent by then 6 weeks constructing the conditions he had promised himself in November, and he had constructed them thoroughly, because he was a thorough man. He had waited until the wage book was public and the bank account was open. He had waited until Tobias Crail had paid her for the South grade, and 2 other outfits had asked for her by name. He had waited until the county paper had run a full column on the 10th under the heading "A Remarkable Winter's Work" that named her 9 times and named the firm twice, and did not use the word remarkable about anything except the loading. And he had waited, though he never said this to anybody, until a Tuesday when she had been sitting on the dock for an hour laughing with Nan Prosser about something, so that whatever he was about to do would not be the only thing that had happened to her that day. He came out with his hat in his hand and said, "Miss Renner, will you walk out to the Tige place with me on Sunday and look at it?" "I have been told about that place since October," said Adelaide. 460 acres and a stone chimney. 460 acres and a stone chimney, and a house I built myself in 1879, said Ezra Coulter, "and the reason I have not asked you to look at it before is that I did not want you to see it until you had a bank book, because a woman who has got somewhere else to go is looking at a house different than a woman who has not." They rode out on Sunday, the 2nd of March, in a light spring wagon, 31 miles, and the country south of the river came up out of winter that week the way it does in that country, all at once and with no warning, the bunch grass going green under the dead grass, and the first buttercups out on the south slopes, and the whole sky the color of a washed plate. The Tige place lay in a fold of the hills with a creek in it and a stand of cottonwoods, and the house was small and square and beautifully made. with a stone chimney that was the work of a man who had cared about a chimney. And there was nothing in it but a stove and a table and a bed and one chair. "One chair," said Adelaide. "I have been 11 months of the year in the mountains for 11 years," said Ezra Coulter. She walked through the whole house and then out and around it and looked at the sill logs and the way the roof was framed and the way the creek came down past it. And then she went and stood at the corner of the house looking east down the fold at 460 acres of grass. He came and stood beside her. He was a foot taller than she was, and he had to look down to see her face, and he did. "I said in November I would ask you when it was settled," he said. "It is settled. Everybody in this county knows what you did, and there is not one of them can say I bought you or that you got anything out of me that you did not put in the book yourself first. So I am going to ask you now, and I am going to say the whole thing because I have been 3 months getting it in order, and if I do not say it now, I will say half of it." "All right," said Adelaide. "I have been a large man my whole life," said Ezra Coulter, "and there is a thing about that which nobody who is not one will ever understand, which is that people do not see you. They see the size, and after about 20 years of it, you stop expecting to be looked at, and you go up into the mountains where nothing looks at you at all." He turned his hat around once. "I never wanted a small woman. I have said that in a letter, and I will say it standing up. Not because of anything to do with how you are made, though I will tell you plain that I have thought about how you are made every single day since the 14th of October, and I am not going to pretend otherwise." He said this without a flicker, and Adelaide, to her own great annoyance, went scarlet from the collar up. "But because I wanted somebody," he said, "who knew what it was to be looked at instead of seen, and who had not turned mean about it." He looked out at the grass. I did not know if such a person existed. "Then a boat come in October, and you set your trunk down in front of 19 men and put your chin up, and I knew inside of 1 minute." Adelaide Renner did not say anything for a while. "I am going to say a hard thing back," she said finally, "because you have been honest, and you would know it if I was not." She kept her eyes on the grass. "I have been proposed to once before. I was 22. He was a hired man on the next place, and he was a decent enough boy, and he asked me in a barn, and I said yes, and I was happy for 4 days. And then I found out from his sister that his mother had told him a big strong girl would be a good investment and would still be working when a pretty one was worn out." She let out a breath. He never said it. He would not have said it. But he had heard it, and he had thought about it, and when I looked at him after that I could see it sitting behind his eyes. So I broke it off. And I have been 6 years knowing that everybody in Grovely thought I was a fool who had thrown away the only offer she would ever get, and they were most likely right. Ezra Coulter stood very still. "And when I got off that boat," said Adelaide, "and Grismer put his hand out with a ticket in it, some part of me was not surprised. That is the part I want you to know about. It has been in me since I was 11, and it does not go away because a mine agent writes my name in a book. There will be days, and I cannot tell you when they will be, when you will say a perfectly ordinary thing to me, and I will hear the other thing under it that is not there." She turned and looked up at him. "You would be marrying that too," she said. "Not just the woman that hauled the boiler." Ezra Coulter thought about it. He was not a fast man, and she had already learned to wait through it, and she waited. Then he said, on the 4th pitch, "When the beam went, what did you think about?" Adelaide blinked. "I did not think about anything. There was not time." "You thought about one thing," he said, "because a person always does." What was it? She stood there in the wind off the tie grass and found, to her own surprise, that she remembered exactly. "I thought," she said slowly, "it is going to hold, because I am heavy." Ezra Coulter nodded once as if a sum had come out. Then, on the days you are talking about, he said, "I will not argue with you, because I have watched 100 men try to argue somebody out of a thing that got put into them when they were 11, and I never saw it work once. I will just say that sentence back to you. Whatever else is going on. And you can do what you like with it." Adelaide Renner put both hands over her face, which she had not done in front of another human being since her mother died, and stood there for about half a minute. Then she took them down and said yes, and then, before he could speak, "And I want it in the spring, and I want it in the yard, and I am not being married in a church in this town by a man who has been telling his wife about me since October." "The yard," said Ezra Coulter. "The yard," said Adelaide Renner. "On the dock. Where I sat on my trunk." They were married on the loading dock of the Coulter yard at 4:00 in the afternoon on the 16th of May, 1885, which was a Saturday, and which the whole of that end of the county treated as a public holiday, whether it was one or not. Nan Prosser made the dress, or rather Nan Prosser cut it and bullied it, and Adelaide sewed most of it herself in the evenings through April, and it was a soft dove-gray wool with a high collar and 11 covered buttons and a band of dark green at the cuff, and it was the first garment Adelaide Renner had ever owned in her life that had been made for her body on purpose from the beginning instead of made for a smaller body and then argued with. She put it on in Nan Prosser's back room and turned around once in front of the glass and then stood still and looked at herself for a long moment, and Nan Prosser, who was 60 and had buried 2 husbands and did not miss anything, went out and shut the door and let her have the room to herself for 6 minutes. They swept the dock. Gunner Scarr built an arch out of 2 wagon tongues and a reach and bolted it together like a piece of ironwork. And Emmett Fenn and 11 other men stripped every blooming thing off a mile of the Mill Creek Road and wound it up the tongues until the whole thing looked like something that had grown there. The freight wagons were run out in 2 ranks with their sideboards washed and their tongues down and their brake handles set, and the 20 mules of the Ketchum string were turned into the near corral in full view with their manes calmed, because Adelaide said that if they were not there, it would not be a true account of the thing. 240 people came. The judge came, and Purvis came, and Orrin Halstead came down from Half Moon Basin with the Cornishman and a wedding present that turned out to be a brass boiler plate, unengraved, which he said she could put anywhere she liked. Tobias Crail came with his wife and both his daughters, and Hollis Pruitt came on 2 canes, having refused a wagon, and got up onto that dock under his own power with his legs still in irons, and stood in the front rank the whole time. Rufus Kane gave her away. That had taken some arranging, because Adelaide's father could not come, being 62 and 1,100 miles off and owing a landlord more than he could clear, and because Adelaide had said at first that nobody needed to give her away, that she had come out here on her own money's worth of ticket and would walk up her own dock. It was Nan Prosser who fixed it. Nan Prosser said, "Child, you are thinking about what it means to be given. Think about what it means to the one that has to do the giving." So Rufus Kane, who was 48 and had a rust-colored beard and had said a thing under his breath on the 14th of October, put on a black coat and stood at the bottom of the dock steps at 4:00 with his arm out like a man holding a hot stove lid, and Adelaide Renner came out of the office door and put her hand on it, and the big man's face came apart entirely, and he said, "Ma'am, I have got to tell you I am not fit for this," and she said, "That is exactly why it is you, Mr. Kane, and now stand up straight." The dock was 90 feet long. She walked the whole of it. She had walked that dock at 10 in the morning on the 14th of October with a trunk in her hand and 19 men going silent around her, and she had counted, that day, every single one of the 22 steps, and had thought about nothing except keeping her chin level. She counted them again on the 16th of May. It came out the same, 22. But the silence was a different substance entirely, and Emmett Fenn was crying openly and not caring, and Cleavardis had both hands on the shoulders of his own boy so the child could see over, and Hollis Pruitt was standing on a broken leg, and at the end of it, under an arch made out of 2 wagon tongues bolted like ironwork, stood the largest man in the state of Oregon in a new dark coat with his hair tied back and his hat off and his enormous hands hanging at his sides doing nothing at all, looking at her the way he had looked at her coming through that gate the first evening, which was the way a man looks at the one thing in a crowded yard that he has actually seen. The minister came out from the Methodist church and did it plain and short at her request. There were 2 moments in it that people in that country repeated for years afterward. The first was when he came to the part about honoring and obeying, and Adelaide said, "I will honor him," quite clearly, and stopped, and did not say the other word, and the minister looked up, and Ezra Coulter said, into the pause, in a voice that carried the length of the dock, "That is right," and go on. And the second was afterward, when it was done, and Ezra Coulter bent down and got his hands under her elbows and lifted her clean off that dock. 310 pounds of her, straight up and around in a full circle in front of 240 people, easily, the way a man swings a child, and set her down again. And the noise those 240 people made carried across the river and was heard by a man fishing on the Washington shore. She was not embarrassed by it. She had expected to be. She thought about that a good deal afterward, in the wagon and in the mountains, and the conclusion she came to was that being lifted in front of everybody had not shamed her because he had not done it to show anybody anything. He had done it because he could not think of another thing to do with his hands. They ate on the dock. Nan Prosser and 4 women had roasted 3 sides of beef in a pit behind the harness shop since Thursday, and there were 11 pies from 11 different kitchens. And somebody's brother had a fiddle, and somebody else had a concertina, and Gunnar Skar, of all people on this earth, sang 2 songs in Norwegian that nobody understood and everybody liked. The dancing went on until the middle of the night. Adelaide danced 4 times, once with her husband, once with Rufus Kane, once with Emmett Fenn, who had to be pushed at her by 3 separate people, and once with Orrin Halstead, who turned out to be a startlingly good dancer and who talked the entire time about tonnage. Toward the end, when it had got down to about 40 people and the lanterns were burning low along the dock rail, Hollis Pruitt got himself over to where she was sitting and lowered himself onto a crate with a good deal of production. "I have been thinking all evening what I would say to you," he said, "and I have decided against all of it except one thing." He looked out at the wagons. "There is 900 men driving freight in this country, ma'am, and every one of them has spent his whole life being told to get lighter, faster, quicker on his feet." He tapped his splinted leg with a cane. "Nobody ever told any of us there was such a thing as being the right weight for the work. I have been 29 years at it, and I never once thought of it until I was lying in a road looking up at you." "Mr. Pruitt," said Adelaide. "I am nearly done," he said. He turned and looked at her. "When you get to be an old woman," he said, "and there is some girl in this country crying in a back room because of what somebody said about the size of her, you will tell her about the 4th pitch. And she will not believe you, and you will tell her anyway, and about 11 years later she will believe you all at once in the middle of doing something else." He got up on his canes. "That is the whole of my speech," he said, "and now, if you will excuse me, I am going to go and be difficult about the pie. The rest of it is a working life, and a working life does not make a story, it makes a ledger. But there are 4 entries in that ledger worth reading out. The first is that the ironwood contract ran 3 seasons instead of 2, and then 5 more after that, and the outfit hauled the whole of the second mill and the tramway cable and 11,000 feet of pipe up the Ketchum without losing a single load or a single man. The rigging she designed in a cold yard in October of 1884 was copied first by Crail Brothers, and then by everybody. And the drag beam with the iron shoe and the chain bridle was still being built to her pattern in that country in 1911, when a young man from the State College came up to look at the old freight roads and wrote in his notes that the local drag was of a design of unknown origin, apparently very old. Gunner Scar's charcoal drawing of the chain figure stayed on the shop wall until the shop burned in 1896, and 11 men had copied it by then. The second is that she bought in. It took her 3 years and 11 months, not 4, and she paid it in money across a table in front of Purvis on the 11th of December, 1888, and the sign that went up over the yard gate that spring was repainted by a man from Portland who charged too much and did beautiful work, and it read Coulter and Coulter, which had been Ezra's idea and which Adelaide had argued against for a week on the grounds that it would confuse the mail, and had then agreed to, and had then gone out and looked at from across the street 4 separate times in the first month, thinking nobody was watching her, and being watched every time by Nan Prosser from the window of the boarding house. The third is the boys. There were 2 of them, born in 87 and 90, and they were enormous, and the older one had his mother's hands and her way of walking around a problem once before touching it, and he ran that yard until 1934. Adelaide freighted through both winters before they came and both winters after, and there was a period of about 11 months when she did not take a load. And Emmett Fenn, who was by then 22 and the best young driver in the county, took the Ketchum runs with her rigging and her instructions and her mules, and brought every one of them in clean, and would not take the freighter's bonus for a single one because he said it was her road. And the fourth is what the country did with her, which is the part she never got any say in. She stopped, at some point in the late 80s, being a thing that people in that town talked about, and became a thing they pointed at, which is different and better and still not entirely comfortable. There was a photograph taken in 1892 on the Ketchum of a very large woman in a canvas apron standing at the head of a 20-mule string with her hand on the neck of a dunwheeler, and it was printed as a card and sold in 2 stores in the Dallas for 11 years, and she never saw a cent of it and never once complained. Because, as she said to Nan Prosser, a girl somewhere is going to see that in a store window. They came to her too. That was the part Hollis Pruitt had been right about and the part she had not believed on her wedding night. They started coming in about 1894, one at a time, usually sent by somebody's aunt, and they were always big girls, and they always came to the yard rather than to the house, and they always stood in the gate the way she had stood in it, and Adelaide Coulter would put down whatever she was holding and walk over. She did not make a speech at them. She had learned early that a speech is the one thing that does not work. What she did instead was hand them something heavy. There was a chain hook that lived on a nail by the office door for 30 years and weighed about 40 pounds, and she would take it off the nail and put it into the girl's hands and say, "Carry that down to the 3rd wagon for me," and the girl would carry it down to the 3rd wagon and come back, and Adelaide would say, "Well, that is one thing you can do that half this town cannot, and we will find out the rest of them by Thursday." She hired 9 of them over the years. 4 stayed in the trade. One of them, a Swedish girl of 19 from a wheat place at Morrow, who arrived in the gate in 1898 with a cardboard case and the exact expression Adelaide had worn in October of 1884, drove freight in that country until the roads got motor trucks on them, and then drove the trucks, and died in 1951 at the age of 72, having been the first woman to hold a commercial hauling license in 3 counties. And there is a paragraph about her in a county history that mentions, in passing, that she had learned her trade from a Mrs. Coulter of the Dallas. Adelaide lived to be 81. She was heavy her whole life and never once apologized for it in any room she was ever in, and the doctor who saw her at the end said she had the heart of a woman of 50 and the hands of a stonemason. There is one more thing, and it belongs at the end. In the summer of 1902, the ironwood mine shut, the ore having played out, and the company sold the mill for scrap, and a crew came up to take it apart. They got the stamps out, and the shafting, and the flywheel. But the 4 mortar blocks were bedded in stone and 11 anchor bolts apiece, and the scrap price would not pay the powder, so they left them. And the boiler, that black riveted shell that had beaten Rufus Kane and burned Bert Naylor's brakes to the iron and broken Cleve Artis's arm, was too far gone in the seams to be worth a wagon, and they left that too, standing on its foundation in the roofless mill with the sky over it. Adelaide Coulter went up the Ketchum in a hired rig one last time in the autumn of 1919. She was 63. Her husband had been dead 2 years, the road was still there, though nobody had graded it since the mine shut, and the fourth pitch was exactly where it had always been. And she had the driver stop and got down and walked out to the outside edge above 400 feet of talus and stood there for a while with her hand on a rock. Then she went on up over the saddle and down into Half Moon Basin and found the mill floor grown over in fireweed with a stone wall standing to the height of a man, and the 4 mortar blocks still down in their pockets in a perfect row, level to within 1/16 of an inch after 35 years, and the boiler beside them rust red now instead of black, with a young pine growing up through where the stack had been. She stood in the fireweed in her good coat and looked at it for about 10 minutes. The driver, who was a young man from Baker and who had been told only that he was carrying an old lady up a disused road to look at a ruin, got tired of waiting and came up and stood beside her and said, meaning nothing by it, "What is it, ma'am? Just an old boiler?" And Adelaide Coulter said, without turning around, "It is 11 tons. Then she went back to the rig and let him help her up into it, which he did with some effort, and they turned around and went down the Ketchum, and she talked to him about brake blocks the whole way.